Hi, friends. I hope everyone is doing well. I just finished the first week of creating one collage a day for my 30-day project, and I think it went well. While editing this video, I decided to call this my warm-up week. I equate it to warming up my hand by sketching or stretching before exercising. This week, I played around with techniques or styles that I've used before. I wanted to see if there was one or more of these that I wanted to explore further, or if it sparked another idea. I'll talk more about it during each collage section. For this first collage, I wanted to use a lighter muted color palette and at least one painted deli paper. I tend to use mid to dark values and a brighter color palette. Also, I like the look of painted deli papers, but I don't think I've mastered the right gluing technique. I want these papers to melt into the collage so you don't see the edges or any air pockets. I wanted to figure out the design before gluing the elements to the substrate. I'm using the glue stick to hold the elements in place now that I have the design. Then I'll flip over the whole collage and glue the back of all of the elements at once. A reminder that I like to have a mix of narration and music during the collaging sections of my videos. Next, I'm deciding on the placement of the painted deli paper. I wanted to make sure it'll show up after it's glued in place. Also, I'm only using a small size of it, so it'll be an accent element. I decided to bring out Golden Soft Gel Matte Medium to adhere the deli paper to the collage. I have used Liquid Matte Medium as well for an adhesive. I need to explore both mediums as adhesives, especially when gluing deli paper to a collage, so there aren't any or very little wrinkles and to avoid any tears. It didn't look like there's enough adhesive under the deli paper in one section, so I pulled a bit of it up and applied more of it underneath. As I was smoothing this re-glued section, I tore some of the deli paper when I scrubbed it instead of using a light smoothing motion with the brush. To avoid tearing it, I need to remember to put more glue on the section of the collage where the deli paper will be placed and to have a light hand when smoothing it. To my eyes, one small light muted element in the upper right area was needed to balance the collage. Here's the finished collage. I'm happy with the way it turned out, even though I tore part of the painted deli paper. I lean toward bright colors in my art, but I do like the calming look of a light muted color palette. I'm continuing to use mostly light leaning color palette for this next collage. I added medium blue and dark purple papers for contrast. Very limited paper selection, which is outside my usual. I tend to pull a lot more papers than needed because I like options. I brought out this Paper Artsy paint in Elephant, which is a good neutral mid-tone gray. I like to put washi tape along the gutter of the journal and a piece of paper behind the page I'm working on so the paint won't seep onto the other pages. This time I'm using wax paper. I don't want a solid ground of gray. Instead, I'm looking for a washy, uneven painted ground. This collage will have a simple geometric design. I'm using an element that was in the first collage as inspiration. That element was made with a red oil pastel. To me, it has sort of a humid shape to it. The top circular shape represents the head and the rest is the body. I'm creating each shape with multiple papers, starting with 2 different papers cut in half for the top circular shape. I'm applying the glue stick on the paper off camera to save time. It looked a bit plain, so I'm adding this half art shape using the medium blue paper, only adding an additional element on the right side. I'd like the design to be asymmetrical. Here's the finished collage. I like the design because it's simple. It's different than my usual style because it's light leaning. Sometimes just changing your usual color palette is just enough of a change. Another limited paper selection, I brought out another deli paper. This one was stamped using black ink. I'm painting the ground layer first. This time I'm using black and off-white paint. I tend to like off-white instead of white paint because it's not as bright. As I started painting, I had the idea in mind to paint the ground in a design, not just an ombre or all-over pattern. I'll use this ground layer design as the guide to place the other papers on top of it. Now that the ground is dry, I'm starting with this light yellow monoprinted paper to cut a shape like the curve of the ground design. This paper is a ghost print. You can get some interesting looking patterns from ghost prints. This pattern has a worn, distressed look to it. I didn't glue the yellow curved paper yet because I wasn't sure if I wanted the other papers to overlap on top of it or underneath it. I'm starting with this mustard color paper to decide on its shape and placement. I decided this paper should be slightly overlapping on top of the yellow curved paper, so I'm gluing it down first, then the mustard paper. Again, I'm using a glue stick off camera. Next, I'm deciding on how many stamped deli images to use and its placement. I decided that only one image is needed. Any more would be too busy looking. I ended up using a glue stick on the back of the deli image. I didn't think it was necessary to use the soft gel matte medium because the image was mostly black. If there were large areas of the unmarked deli paper, then I would have used the matte medium to help melt the deli paper into the painted ground. I felt that the dark green paper would be a good accent element to finish the collage. I decided that the dark blue paper wasn't necessary. Another simple collage, but it's a bit more detailed than the previous simple collage. Having a painted design on the ground layer helped to elevate the design. I pulled a lot more paper scraps for this collage because I wanted to cover the whole substrate. You'll see why in a moment. I'm marking 1/8 of an inch from the gutter as a guide not to collage over that line. If the papers are placed along the gutter, then the edges will be damaged when the sketchbook journal is closed. When I'm placing the scraps, I'm thinking of having mostly mid to dark values and different sizes, but not too small. I'm trying to use the scraps as is or not cutting off too much. I brought out off-white paint again. This time I'm using it to paint a simple design over the collage surface with a light hand. I still want the papers to be seen underneath the paint, even if it's just the outline of the paper. Here's the finished collage. I'm interested in further exploring this technique. This is a simple design, but it can be expanded with a larger substrate. This collage was inspired by the previous one, but this collage will have a different design. It'll be constructed in layers. First, I'm going to paint the substrate with this Blick's matte acrylic paint in dark green deep. Not sure why I decided to put the paint directly on the substrate. It was a bold move on my part. Once the paint dry, I started by adding a few of the monoprinted papers on top of it in 3 different areas. I wanted to start balancing the design for the next step. I brought out off-white paint again, but this time instead of painting a simple design, I'm painting over the whole surface. Also, the application of the paint is different than the previous collage. I'm applying a heavy coat of paint. I've used this technique before, but I thought of a different design that I wanted to try. While the paint is still wet, I'm using the end of a brush handle to scrape away the paint to create an all-over pattern. I typically use this technique as an accent in selected areas, but I wanted to create an all-over pattern this time. I decided to go back to my paper stash and pull a few more dark value papers in purple and blue. The remaining papers I have out are leaning mid-tone, except for the one dark blue paper. I'll be using a diagonal composition going from the lower left to the upper right. I want the color papers under the off-white design to show as much as possible. I'm starting by adding dark value papers, then I'll move on to mid-tone values. The painted ground is the light value in this collage. I'm being mindful to have elements in different sizes and shapes, even if it's a slight difference. I think it makes the design more interesting to look at. The orange paper is being used as small accents that adds contrast to the blue and purple papers. Also, it ties into the yellow-orange paper that's underneath the off-white paint. The turquoise paper is being used as an accent as well and introduces a different shape. Here's the finished collage. I like that it has many layers that adds depth to the design. I like the scraping away paint technique, but the design needs to be refined a bit more. I need to think about how I would elevate it. I'm back to pulling more papers than needed. There's monoprinted papers, old book pages, and floral images from magazines. As you can see, I tried to cover up some paint that got on this page. I tried to take precautions to avoid this from happening, but it does occasionally. I decided to come back in and paint a solid ground of off-white. I didn't put any washi tape on the gutter because this page is the first one of the next signature. As you can see, there's a gap between the signatures because I used the Coptic stitch. I had a simple design idea in mind when I pull these papers, specifically the magazine image. I typically don't use magazine images or images in general in my art practice. This is something I want to explore to see if I could add it to my practice. I'm being careful when I'm using the smoothing tool not to tear the magazine image. This book page is very fragile, so I thought it'd be best to glue it to the substrate with soft gel matte medium. The pressure applying glue with a glue stick may tear the paper. By applying the matte medium on the substrate, then laying the book page on top of it is a gentler way to adhere it. I could have eliminated the step of adding the matte medium top of the book page, but I wanted to see how it would take the medium when brushing on top of it. There was some wrinkling, but the ink from the text didn't smear, which is a good thing to know. I decided against using the smoothing tool because I was concerned it may tear the book page. I'm okay with the small amount of wrinkling. I'm going to finish the collage by adding some of the monoprinted papers in different sizes and shapes. I want to mention that I pulled these colors to tie in with the colors in the magazine image. I like this collage, but it does have my usual design style, so I'm not surprised. What is different is using a magazine image. Having different types of patterns added interesting element to the collage: glossy magazine image, worn old book page, and monoprinted pattern papers. Once again, I pulled more papers than needed, but I'm doing another design with papers covering the whole substrate. I wanted to make sure I had enough variety of colors. I'll add music as you watch me complete this first layer. I'll come back for the next step. Now that the substrate is covered with colorful papers, I'm going to start with this bright yellow paint. I like the look of dripping paint, and my idea is to place the paint in one general area and have it drip outwards. Dripping paint on a surface works best if you're holding it up on its end. Gravity will move the paint down, but as you see, the paint needs to be the right consistency. Sometimes you need to help the paint to drip by using a brush to guide it. I brought out the hairdryer to dry the paint and to see if it'll move the drips. Part of the design was to have multiple colored drips, so I started with the light value first, which was the bright yellow. Now I'm coming in with dark purple to do the similar design on top of the bright yellow. This time the central painted area will be narrower, so it won't cover too much of the bright yellow. The area where the purple is on top of the bright yellow looked a bit plain to me. I brought out this black paint to add a small detail on top of these two colors. I held the paintbrush at the very end and loosely scribbled the black paint. Here's the finished collage. It was fun to create. Not sure if this exact design is something that I want to develop, but maybe I could pull parts of it. I need to think about it. Well, that's a wrap for this first full week of my 30-day project. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to watch this video. I'll see you next week for the next set of collages. I hope to see you then. Take care.